Hi, my name is Tiffany Wright, and this is an episode of Lawyering Behind the Scenes. So today, you can't see it, but I am wearing a shirt that says, all you need is love and a good attorney. So today we're gonna talk about engagement rings, prenups, marriage, and divorce. All the lawyering that has to get involved in people's messy, personal, romantic relationships. Because they go right, they go wrong, it just depends. So let's get into it. First, we're going to talk about engagement rings. So engagement rings, so beautiful, so sweet. An interesting thing that I learned recently is that was not like custom before. I mean, is this really a surprise? It wasn't a custom until diamond companies got involved, and they made this whole concept of engagement ring. And we've seen these humongous shiners, beautiful rings that are just part of our culture now. A diamond is forever, which is a trademarked phrase, by the way. Diamond actually doesn't have to be forever. So there's been cases where a couple gets engaged, he or she gives their partner the ring, and then the engagement goes south. So I read about this case where this gentleman, who was a lawyer, by the way, sued his spouse, or sued his ex-fiance for the ring. He bought her a $100,000 ring, and he claims it was at her behest. So he said his budget was only like 40 grand, I want to say, or 20 grand. And she's like, no, I need a bigger ring. And then he gives in and gets her the bigger ring. And then the relationship sours. And the interesting thing too is that he put so much detail into his complaint about the relationship. Can you imagine breaking up with someone and they file a complaint that, actually becomes public record at a point, and just gives all the dirty details of your relationship, how you acted, how they acted, but of course it's going to focus on how the person who's not filing acted, and just airs all your dirty laundry, and you're fighting over a ring. Like, I have not been in that situation where, I had engagement that broke up and I need to give it back a ring, but I think I'd give it back. Like, is it really worth it? If they cheat on you, like, I'd sell it maybe, but if it's gonna be a whole drama and he's gonna sue me over it, I think I just give the ring back. Like, really, I just give the ring back. And then there can be extra complications too when somebody's giving you a family heirloom. Just really, really bad. So what is the law surrounding that? All the states really treat it differently, and there's really like 3 ways that they can treat it. It's considered a gift, so they don't have to give it back, basically. It can be a conditional gift, that giving the engagement ring is a condition if we get married. So if we don't get married, then you need to give it back. An implied conditional gift, which I think it's like that in California, is the ring is considered an implied conditional gift, meaning that if the person who gave the ring breaks up the engagement, the person who didn't break off the relationship gets to keep the ring because they didn't cause the breakup, which is really interesting that there's law surrounding this, which makes you know that it happens a lot. Like, if there is law about something, that means that it's happened enough times for them to have a concrete law. Things that have happened a few times, there'll be a few cases, there won't be a concrete decision on it, but you can tell that this must happen all the time, where people break up and then, they want the ring back. And another interesting thing is that the wedding band after you get married is considered marital property. So this attorney in an article that I read made the joke, like, spend more on the wedding ring. Don't spend a lot on the engagement ring, because the wedding ring is marital property. And we'll talk about that about that more, what marital property means and community property and all that during the course of a marriage, where you would, in some cases, depending on the state you live, get to keep it. Okay, so next we are going to talk about prenups. This has been in the news lately because Dr. Dre and his wife are getting divorced. They've been together a long time and they don't have a prenup. So I think Dr. Dre, yeah, he's known as a rapper, all of that, but he just made a lot, not just, but in recent years, he's made a lot of money in his Beats by Dre, which was acquired by Apple. So people have been joking, her name's Nicole, become like Nicole, Beats by Nicole. And there's also rumors storming around that she's an attorney, but that has not been validated and she's not registered as an attorney anywhere. So we don't really know about that. We just know sis was smart enough not to have a prenup. I'm just saying. So it's been in the news lately. Prenups are, I feel like something that's constant in society. We're always talking about who has a prenup, who doesn't have a prenup, and what can happen, what can really go wrong if you don't have a prenup and one person becomes wildly more successful than the other person. I think that's like the core of it. So let's take a step back. What is a prenup? A prenup is an agreement before marriage that dictates how things will be split and what will happen in the event of a divorce. There are requirements in most states regarding how a prenup is formed. Like each person needs to be represented by counsel. You can't have someone sign it like you give it to them the day before the wedding and they have to sign it. Usually there's a period of time that somebody has to wait and get it reviewed and consult with counsel in order to agree to the prenup. The person has to understand it in their language. So if you're dating someone who doesn't speak English, and I'm in the United States, so I'm doing this from an American perspective. If you're dating someone who doesn't speak English and you give them an English agreement, you need to give them time to understand it. You need to get them a translator. You need to let them consult an attorney and all that. So an agreement, a prenup, you can agree to whatever you want, but the circumstances surrounding how you entered into that prenup have to be fair. And in the prenup, you can dictate everything except for really child support. So you can really make some interesting agreements. People do there's like a rumor that Beyonce and Jay-Z, like Beyonce gets $5 million per child in the event of a divorce. You can have all these different terms that will come in the event of a divorce. So it's really interesting. And also on a American Greed episode and in Snapped, let me just tell you guys, I am obsessed with true crime. Like obsessed. I love Snapped, I love Dateline, I love Killer Couple. Anyway, going back to what we're talking about, I brought up Snapped and all those shows is because sometimes they kill the person, the spouse, because they have a prenup and they don't want to, so the prenup wouldn't imply in death, but it would imply in divorce. So they rather kill the person, or they don't want to get divorced, or they're fighting during the divorce. I mean, it's just crazy. So you really got to be careful, coming from a single person, of course. You really got to be careful who you marry, because they could end up killing you over a prenup or over money or over a divorce. So scary. There was this American Greed episode where this woman hired a hitman to go after her husband because she didn't want the prenup to be in effect, and she just wanted to kill him, and that way she could get more money. Crazy. So side note on that. And then some celebrity couples who with some famous prenups, ones that are divorced, Khloe Kardashian and Lamar Odom. She had way more money than him, even though he was pretty well off. He was a basketball player, but they had a prenup, and she's and Khloe Kardashian, highly recommends Prenups. Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, that was a whole Scientology etc. mess, but they did have a prenup, so they went their separate ways, and I think that she got paid pretty well as a result of that. The people that are still together that famously have a prenup: Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade. So those couples are still together. We'll see what happens. You never really get to see, unless it becomes like a really big case or somehow it becomes public, you see like the actual terms of a prenup, but a lot of times they're kept private. So it's really mostly speculation, talking to people that are involved, or if the celebrity chooses to disclose it themselves. So lessons learned there: get a prenup. Even if you don't have a lot of assets, it's still great to get a prenup. I think a lot of people think it's not romantic, but you never know what can happen if you get divorced. It's just easier. You don't have to go through, some of these divorces could be like 5 years because people are just fighting over things. And it's so much simpler if you just decide all of that while you're in love than when you hate each other. And you just kind of think of it that way. Obviously that's such a personal decision, but I think at least consulting with a lawyer before you get married and discussing the option of a prenup and discussing, how to protect your assets is a good thing. Because if not, community property applies in some states, like California is a community property state. So any property acquired during the course of marriage that is not separate property is community property and is divided equally upon divorce. And that is what's going to happen with Dr. Dre and his wife. If they go through with their divorce, then the property is going to be divided equally and she's going to make a lot of money. And a recent case of that, I'm pretty sure, was Jeff Bezos and his wife. I don't know if they had a prenup or what it was, but girlfriend made out. Not that these people don't deserve what they've put into the marriage, but you just have to be careful. If you're coming into the marriage with a lot of money and then that money is going to make money, you got to be careful. Just like another note about that is that's community property. Separate property during the course of marriage is stuff that you get as a gift and is inheritances and stuff like that. So that is protected even in community property states. Okay, so we kind of talked about community property already. So now we're going to talk about marriage, but some other issues that come up with a marriage. The main thing that when lawyers talk about marriage is talking about community property, separate property, etc. So I want to go into some little interesting things about marriage, like can you sue your spouse during the course of your marriage? So at common law, you couldn't. The reasoning was because a marriage is viewed as a single entity. Therefore, suing one spouse was really suing the marital entity. So now some states prohibit it, but some states allow it where there's certain exceptions, including when there's like an intentional tort. So an intentional tort would be assault. And the other thing is marital privileges. So like if your spouse commits a crime during the course of your marriage, there is privileges in a criminal court which are under evidence law that apply. So the first one is the confidential marital privilege, meaning the spouse does not have to testify about confidential communications that took place during the marriage. So because it's a public policy thing where they want to encourage couples to speak candidly with each other, to share confidences. I mean, that's the part of being in an intimate relationship. So public policy doesn't want to get in the way with that. The other one is spousal witness privilege, where a spouse can't be forced to testify against their spouse. So that the spouse who's the testifying or the would-be testifying spouse is the one who has to invoke that. It's not the criminal spouse who gets to say, oh, she can't testify against me. The That's how it comes up in cases, because you see sometimes like people are still married in criminal cases. You'll see that they're still married, but they're not on good terms, let's say that. And that's where those privileges come up. So next we were going to talk about divorce. Divorce is when a marriage is legally dissolved. And in a lot of states, there has to be a separation period. The divorce is separating the marriage, dividing marital assets. So that's where the prenup comes in. That's where community property and separate property comes in. Alimony, which is when one spouse has to pay the other spouse. And it's not just like, I think sometimes people think like alimony is always the male in the relationship. No, it's either party. So if the woman was a breadwinner and the male stayed home, or if it's a same-sex couple and one person stayed home and the other person went to work and was the primary breadwinner, and the person who stayed home took care of the family and now does not have an occupation or any work history, and it doesn't just have to be that scenario, but that's usually when alimony comes into play. And then the only way to really get out of alimony, if there's not a time period set forth in the divorce decree, the only way to get out of alimony really sometimes is when the spouse receiving the alimony gets married to someone else. And then the last part would be child support if there were children that were conceived as part of the marriage. So another thing that I thought was interesting is that this is not really part of divorce necessarily, but it could result as a reason for a divorce. So if you have an infidelity in your relationship and you want to sue, there's cases where, this is not funny, I need to stop. There's cases where a spouse gets cheated on and then they sue the person that their spouse cheated on them with. So there's in some states, so this is not in all states, let me look so I can be correct. The states where it's called alienation of affections, and the states where this is still valid is Hawaii, hey, Mississippi, New Mexico, North Carolina, South Dakota, and Utah. So you can sue the person who broke up your marriage and sue them for alienation of affection. And I think that is kind of awesome, but maybe that should be in more states, because that would really cut back on a lot of infidelity during marriage. If you knew that the person that you hooked up with could get, their spouse could sue you, I don't know, maybe you'd think twice, because it doesn't seem to deter people to not date married people. So maybe this would do it. Bring back alienation of affection. Bring it back, bring it back. Anyway, today we talked about engagement rings, prenups, divorce, or marriage, and divorce. So it was a whole know before you go vibe. So before you buy an engagement ring, be sure you're going to stay with the person, or you can also draw up a property contract to say, listen, if it doesn't work out, that is like, to me, this is even less romantic than getting a prenup. If you get engaged and then a week later you give your spouse, this is like such a lawyer thing to do, give your spouse a property contract saying, if the engagement doesn't work out, the ring is actually my property. Can you sign this? That'd be awesome. I wonder if there's people who do that. Anyway, get a prenup so you don't have to worry about it, and you can decide all that while you're in love instead of when you're in hate maybe, or you're going through a contentious divorce, or you're stressed out because you're trying to see what's best for the kids. If you have all that settled beforehand, think about how much easier it could be. In marriage, if your spouse is a criminal, you have certain rights not to testify against them or to divulge certain confidential information that was discussed during the marriage. And then upon divorce, Divorces can take a while because you have to discuss alimony, separation of property, and child support. And if your spouse cheats on you, make sure it's in Hawaii, Utah, New Mexico, or one of those states, so then you can sue the person that they cheated on you with and get money for them breaking up your marriage. That's all I have for you today. I'm Tony Wright, and this is Lawyering Behind the Scenes. I'll see you next time.